Really looking forward to this series as we continue to work through it. This series that we're calling Tribe is a series on marriage, family, parenting, all aspects of that from a biblical perspective. And again, as I said last week, it seems like so many of these things, as I study and prepare, I think surely they know. But it's important that old ancient truths be repeated often, because the enemy's often at work with new lies, and he's always on the prowl. So if you weren't here for last week's series, I'll encourage you to go watch that on YouTube or Vimeo or catch the podcast. It'll help you connect all of it. I don't think there will be anything in that lesson that will be in particularly new revelation, but I do think it'll help set the foundation for what we're going to talk about today and in the coming Sundays. Reviewing what we covered last week, we said that marriage began in God's mind. It's not some idea that man came up with, some idea that human beings figured out. No, this all began with God, and it began in His mind, and that's why it's a beautiful thing, which leads us to the second point, that marriage is both holy and honorable, and that we're called to treat it with that sort of holiness and reverence as we think about it, whether it's our own marriage or someone else's marriage. We should revere that holy and sacred covenant. I hope that you did that this week. I hope that you took the time to tell someone or text someone that you appreciate the role model that they are for you in marriage. We had several folks stand last week. They've been married 50 years or more. So we have all sorts of people that we can look to. They're not perfect and their marriages aren't perfect, but we can look to as an example of people who've held on, stayed faithful, stayed committed through thick and thin, through heaven and hell. Third, we said that marriage serves a spiritual purpose. This is what we really see in the relationship between husband and wife. In Ephesians 5, Paul will talk about the relationship to Christ and the church. And sometimes we disconnect that spiritual purpose behind marriage. It's a picture of what God has done in the redemption story, but it's also about our own personal sanctification. Marriage will work the selfishness right out of you if you'll do it properly. And lastly, we talked that marriage reflects the gospel picture. So those are four things we talked about last week, and if that's a brief review, and again, if you didn't catch it, I'll encourage you to go catch it again online. Did you do your homework? Last week we gave you some homework. Every day at 11:11, your alarm should have gone off, and that alarm should have prompted a question from you to your spouse if you're married. And the question was very simple: how can I serve you best today? We did this, Christy and I did this through the week, and I'll be honest, some days it was kind of challenging, because I couldn't think of something. In fact, one day Christy just replied, "I got nothing." And that's okay. I suppose that in the day-to-day relationship between husband and wife, there's going to be days when you don't have a particular need. But that question, offered in sincerity every day, gives you the opportunity to keep in mind what marriage is all about. You serving your spouse well. Or as Ephesians 5 say, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And that's a really important thing. So if you didn't do your homework, I hope that you'll go ahead and set an alarm right now. I see some of you on your phones, and I'm sure that that's what you're doing. Set an alarm for 11:11 and ask your spouse, how can I serve you best today? I hate new gas cans. Now, there are some of you sitting here thinking, I've heard a ton I've read books, I've heard sermons, lessons on marriage, and I do not know where he is going with this. I have never heard a sermon on this topic introduced that way. It occurred to me yesterday as I was in the garage doing some things. In my, why are you all so nervous? I was working in my garage, and on a shelf there in the garage, I have 4 gas cans. And 3 of them are new gas cans. And if you don't know what I mean by new gas cans, this is actually a new gas can from Walmart. Just bought it less than an hour ago. And somewhere along 2008, 2009, 2010, someone amongst our leaders and our betters said, gas cans are a problem. They leak, they let fumes off into the atmosphere, and so we need to fix gas cans. Now, I myself didn't particularly notice a problem with gas cans, but those who know better than us saw a problem with gas cans. So I don't know who it was. I don't know his or her name, or if it was a single one person or a committee of people. But I do know this, that as they gathered together to fix the problem of gas cans, the people who led the way on that problem had never, ever used a gas can in their life. Now, I tell you that if you have no idea what I'm talking about, okay, good, because you haven't used a gas can recently. But since the invention of the internal combustion engine, there were gas cans, and gas cans were developed in a certain way that you poured the fluid out, and there was a vent that allowed the air to escape so that the fluid would flow. It's a part of fluid dynamics and air pressure and all of that, and everybody knew that you needed that. You could take a 7-year-old in the garage, and he knew you had to uncap, let the air flow to let the pour out. But somebody said, that's not a good idea. We need to fix this thing that's working really well. And so they came up with a new idea. Now, this isn't the gas can I have at home. 3 of them are new gas cans. And when I use those gas cans, I assure you that I have leaked more gas on my garage floor and leaked more fumes into the atmosphere trying to make the new gas can work like it should. See, the problem with the new gas can is that it fixed a problem that wasn't there and made the problem worse. This is the old adage, the most dangerous words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, okay? They fixed a problem that made the problem worse, not better. Now, some of you are sitting there thinking, I'm totally lost. I have no idea what this has to do with marriage. I know the prop preacher up there has to have some sort of prop, and this is apparently that. I'm making a point here, and if you haven't followed, I'll connect the dots for you. I told you I have 4 gas cans. Now, if you went in and I left my garage door open and you stole everything in my garage, the thing that I would hope that you did not steal was my old gas can. My cars, bikes, power tools, I can replace all that. Because the old gas can works. Human beings, since the beginning, have had something that works really well. It's designed to increase the population. It's designed to bring people together. It's designed to grow us spiritually and help us. It works when it's done according to God's way. But almost since sin entered the world, human beings have been trying to fix God's design, trying to come up with something that works a little better. And in the opening pages of Genesis, you have things like polygamy. You see people intermarrying with different groups, with different nations, and the idolatry that those intermarriages brought forth. You see things like adultery and divorce and all sorts of things that mess with the original plan. And this series, particularly on marriage, is talking about the original plan. The plan that works best. The plan that has the least amount of problems. Now, there are still problems in marriage because it involves 2 sinful people. But the plan works really well. And so the next time as you're in your garage struggling with these ridiculous new gas cans, I hope that it reminds you that sometimes we have things that work really well that we don't need to fix. We just need to go back to the original plan. If we'll do that, we'll be the better for it. Well, where's God's original plan for marriage? I'm glad that you asked. I want you to open your Bibles or scroll on your phones to Genesis chapter 2 is where we're going to be this morning as we talk about the original design, the design that works best, the plan that's not broken. This, of course, is pre-fall and pre-sin. God knows that all of that's going to happen. Last week we were in Genesis 1. Today we're in Genesis 2. And I've got two verses from Genesis chapter 2. And if you're in Genesis chapter 2, go to verse 24 and 25. All of it's good, but 24 and 25 is where we're going to focus this morning. The ESV reads, "Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and not ashamed." Okay, this is the original plan for marriage. This is what God had in mind when he put Adam and Eve in the garden. And really, these two verses succinctly and perfectly give us God's original idea, his original plan on marriage. And from these two verses, we see five things. We're not going to cover all five this lesson. This is kind of a two-part lesson. But we're talking about everything that marriage needs, what every marriage needs. The first thing that we see in Genesis 2, 24 and 25 is that marriage needs maturity. Now, I told you last week, my wife and I were married when we were 21 and 22. We've learned a lot of things since 21 and 22. 25 years will teach you a few things. So in some ways, we were very immature. I'm not talking necessarily, when I talk about maturity, I'm not talking about age. I'm talking about a way of thinking, an attitude, and a mindset that you must have regardless of what age you get married. 1 Corinthians 13:11, Paul is describing love, but he writes this verse that I think is so interesting. In verse 11, he writes of 1 Corinthians 13, he says, "When I was a child, I talked like a child and thought like a child and reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me." That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about maturity. It has to do with how you think about yourself and your partner. Okay, that's really important. My wife's grandmother, Granny Smith, was married when she was 16 years old. And today we think of that and go, whoa, something must have happened, right? This was like a shotgun wedding or what happened? No. It was Thelma Smith had been basically in charge of her home and raising siblings and doing chores and looking out for other people and making meals and cleaning houses since she was 12 or 13. She had a maturity that was ready for the covenant, as well as her husband, Gilbert. So when they got married, though they were very young, they were mature. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about marriage requires maturity. Marriage is something that's for mature people. One way I define maturity is acting unselfishly in the best interest of another first. Acting unselfishly in the best interest of another first. That's maturity. An immature person acts on behalf of themselves first. An immature person thinks only of themselves first. The description of love in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4 through 6 says love is patient, kind, it does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful, does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. To get to that level of love, you have to be mature. It requires thinking of yourself less. And that's important. That's what marriage, you'll learn it, and you'll learn it over and over again. If you're having trouble in your marriage, think of yourself less. Immature and self-centered people are not ideal for marriage. And to some degree you say, well, who in the world can get married? Think about a baby for just a second. Okay? I see my brother-in-law taking their youngest child out. Okay? Corbin is a cute little baby. Okay? But can I be honest for just a second? Corbin's selfish. As all babies are. You ever watch a young parent take a baby out and the baby's screaming and crying and hollering? Does a baby have no concern for how tired his mother is? Does the baby not care that the father's worked all week long? Does the baby not care that there are several hundred people trying to pay attention in worship? No. Babies don't think about that at all. Babies are immature and selfish. And they don't care about anyone else. And we overlook that because babies are cute. But as babies grow up, we have an expectation that they learn to be, they can still be cute, but just be less self-centered. Babies want what they want when they want it, and they don't care how it affects or impacts anyone else. Some people grow up physically, but are still babies. They don't care how much trouble they cause everyone else. They're not giving any thought to the disruption of other people's lives. They want what they want when they want it. And such a person should never get married. Because marriage needs the opposite. Marriage needs maturity. Marriage needs unselfishness. Go back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Let's keep reading in Genesis. Second thing marriage needs is boundaries. Marriage, Genesis 2:24 says, "A man shall leave his father and his mother." Marriage is leaving your family to create a new family. I don't think that surprises anyone. I remember 25 years ago when I stood about here. And my father-in-law to be walked my bride to be down forward. And as he came forward, I came here, and the preacher said, "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" And Doug said, "Her mother and I." Now that simple act is a tradition which tells you something, if you're paying attention. That what's happening in that moment is a new family is being formed in the earth. And I shook Doug's hand, and he hugged and kissed his daughter, and then I stood in the place where he was standing, and we walked up together. And that day, a new family, a new home was created. Now, something that's very important for marriages is that they have boundaries. And Genesis 2 mentions this. A man shall leave his father and mother, and the two shall become one flesh. And it's really important that we don't miss that. Now hear me. I have won the in-law jackpot. My mother and father-in-law are great people. They're kind and loving and supportive. They've helped us in so many ways. And they've done that while at the same time observing that Toby and Christy have their own home. And they might do things differently than we would, but that's okay, because we love them both. When we got married, it wasn't intentionally, but it worked out very well. I received a job in Phoenix, Arizona. And a young couple, freshly married, had 2 years together. 1,600 miles from anyone that we knew in our families. And that, as I look back on that, that was such a blessing from God. Not because we didn't love our families, because that gave us 2 years to learn to trust, to strengthen our bond. For me, to learn the proper way to fold towels, to learn our quirks and our idiosyncrasies. And when we left Phoenix, Arizona, we were stronger in our marriage because of it. Now, some people don't like the word boundaries, but boundaries are a good, healthy thing. Boundaries are a blessing. When Joshua said in Joshua 24:15, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord," Joshua was drawing a line. He said, "You decide for yourselves, but as for me and my house," he was drawing a boundary. Proverbs gets real clear. We've been studying Proverbs on Sunday night. It's been a great study. You've enjoyed it. Join us if you like at 5 o'clock. Proverbs 25 says, let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he have his fill of you and hate you. Okay? Proverbs says it's good to have a boundary with your neighbor, to respect that boundary. Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And Jesus said, it's okay to have boundaries in your life. It's good. It's important in our relationships. People who dislike boundaries are typically the people who most need them. Boundaries are a blessing. We're told in Scripture, do not move an ancient boundary stone. That's how they tell where one guy's pasture began, or ended, and another man's began. Those boundary stones are important. We have all sorts of boundaries and borders. Physical, emotional, spiritual borders bring order and peace to chaos. Now, I want you to think about this phrase for just a second. Borders bring order. Borders bring order. And there's all sorts of borders. There's physical barriers, okay? When you came into this building, you walked through a couple of borders. Okay? We had those unlocked and the magnets were turned off so you could get in. There's emotional borders. You've got someone who's toxic in your family, someone who makes you worse. It's okay to say, we're not ready to have this conversation. And that's a border. Spiritual borders. We need a time where a church says, we're not going to allow that. Your home has borders. We call them doors and walls. Why? Well, because borders bring order. You have exterior walls in your home so that there's a place where your family can sleep in safety. Not just anyone can come inside. That's important. Your home has interior walls, a place of separation, okay? A room for mothers and fathers to go into and shut the door and be husband and wife. That's important. Children and siblings want their own room or their own space. That's important too. Borders bring order. The kingdom of heaven is described in Revelation as a spiritual place that has walls and gates. They don't just allow anyone in. That's how there's peace. That's how there's no sin. Is God brings order through borders. If you don't have proper borders, you have chaos, disorder, strife, violence. All sorts of things happen when you lack borders. We all know what's going on southern border. I don't have to be, that's just an awareness thing. We see people coming in, human trafficking, fentanyl coming out, being the number one drug. All of that's happening because we don't have a border. That's a simple thing. Whether we're talking about spiritually, or we're talking about our nation, or we're talking about your family, and that's really where I want the emphasis here. Borders bring order. Now, you have walls in your home, but you also have a door, which allows you to let people in. And at the end of the night, to keep people out. Your marriage needs some boundaries and some borders. 7 years ago, we moved in the house we're living in. And one of the first things we did was put up a fence. And that wasn't because we hated our neighbors. In fact, it was because we love our neighbors. That fence clearly said, this is the part Grace is responsible for mowing. Good fences make good neighbors. In fact, my next door neighbor, he's only lived there a few years, but the guy that owned the house before him, he didn't have a fence. And as he was getting ready to move, he just came and talked to me, and he said, when you first moved in here, first thing you did was put up a fence, and I didn't like that because my yard didn't have a fence. And he said, but you guys have been great neighbors. There's a reason. Good fences make good neighbors. Now, I spent a lot of time on this point because I'm leading to something, and you know where I'm leading. Your marriage needs some borders, some very clear and distinct borders, because borders bring order. Lack of borders brings chaos. Married people should have boundaries. Married people can't act like single people. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but if you're married, you need to act married. You can't go out partying with your single friends. That's not going to be good for your marriage. Married people protect the relationship. When the two become one, you become this very sacred, beautiful circle, and no one else comes into the circle except the Lord himself. So you have to be diligent about protecting the borders of your marriage. You have to protect that sacred bond. And so you need borders and boundaries to protect your relationship. And there's lots of things that if you don't have a boundary around your marriage, you don't have a border around your covenant, that will be marriage killers. There's a proverb that says, it's in Ecclesiastes, the little foxes spoil the vines. This is really a profound thought. Because when I think about marriages that struggle and that haven't made it, it's because of the little foxes. It's the little things that got in the way. It was a husband who stayed just a little too long at work continually. It was a husband and wife who let their children constantly get in between them. It's a lack of a border from the little foxes that ruin the vine. And there are a ton of things that can ruin the vine. It can be in-laws. It can be your own children. You see what I'm saying? Like, these are people you love, but they can be little foxes that ruin the vine. It can be your career. It can be entertainment. It can be pornography. It can be friendships. It can be ungodly people. The list goes on, and the only way to protect your marriage is to set boundaries around it, to be intentional about protecting the sacred covenant that God has given you. And Christians are good, well-meaning, loving people, and they just want to be friendly and nice, and they want to just let everybody in, and that is not good. Okay? It's not. I mean, our kids probably know it better than most of us, but, you know, things like thruples is trending on TikTok. Because we're going to make polygamy great. Because one man needs 2 or 3 women. Now, that's an extreme example. There are all sorts of little foxes that'll spoil your vine. Okay? It might just be a little fox in your pocket. So you gotta be careful about those little foxes. They'll ruin the vine. They'll do it every time. Last need of marriage is commitment. Genesis 2 says, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. Marriage requires commitment. Okay, by the way, this is the difference between being married and living together, which is another popular thing, and has been even among Christians. Okay? Living together is still living in sin. I know the world is well past that. Oh, that's so antiquated. Everybody knows you got to test drive the car before you buy it. Well, yeah, you test drive cars, but cars are objects. People are not. You're living together, you know someone who is. If you're living together, you need to know that the person you're living it, they may say they love you, but I will gently say they're not committed to you. They're not. They haven't taken a vow before God and others. There's no level of commitment. They've said to you, I really, really would like your naked body. I don't know if I want your naked soul. I don't want to commit too much. I don't want to be... Can we just have the best parts of being married but not be in a committed marriage? God says, that won't work. And we know that that's true. Your marriage is a commitment beforehand. When Christy and I stood together 25 years ago and made these commitments in front of God and those witnesses that were there, we were making a commitment for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. Long before we experienced anything, any adventure, any difficulty, any trouble. And we were just getting ready for the honeymoon. As far as we knew, that was all marriage was about. But married people know the honeymoon comes to an end. And so, here's the value of being married, is someone is making a commitment to you. A commitment to you. No matter what. You know what the most powerful parts of the vows are? They're not the words you would think. They're the conjunctions. For better or worse. richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. It's commitment to you regardless of the outcome. We're in this thing together. Or as I tell Christy, if you ever leave, I'm going with you. And so marriage requires that commitment to each other first, and of course secondary to God, but within the covenant, the commitment to each other first and foremost. Hear me now. Do not put your kids first. Don't do it. Don't do it. Oh, they will let you put them first, but you would be unwise to do so. I've seen countless marriages that when little birds fly the nest, husband and wife go, because we don't know how to function anymore. We haven't been a couple in decades. Put your marriage first, not your kids. It seems so, it goes so much against our instinct, right? If you're on a plane, turbulence, all of a sudden, warnings, oxygen masks come down, and your instinct, if you're a good mom and a good dad, will be to put them on your children. What do they always tell you to do? Your mask first. The very best thing you can do for your children is put them a far second to your spouse. Nothing gives a child more stability than knowing mom loves dad and dad loves mom. And that's not going to change. Don't put your job first. Don't put sports and entertainment. Don't put your kids' sports and entertainment. There's all sorts of little foxes that are trying to ruin the vine. So keep your commitment to one another. We're going to discuss the other two things that your marriage needs next week, and that will be more PG-13 or spicy chicken if you like. Please, somebody's watching the live stream, aren't they? Open your phone right now, please. Open it to your calendar right now, please. Scroll down from September to October to November to December to January of 2025. I want you to put this date on there. I want you to go ahead and just reserve the place in the calendar for January 10th and 11th here at Northside. That is the date of the Strong Marriages Conference. Trey and Lee Morgan are going to come and speak and share. If you don't know Trey and Lee Morgan, you're not on social media. They have about like 1 million followers on Instagram. They reach people beyond just church people. They have high quality content that's biblical, spiritual, and practical. And we've been on the waiting list for 2 years to get them. So it's not like, oh, if I miss it this year, I can go see them next year. That's not the case, okay? So this is a high value opportunity. Please put it on your calendar. Set a reminder for a week ahead and plan to be here. Get a babysitter if you need to. We may have something provided. But most of all, I need to tell you, you need to be there, because if you don't, John Dunham will find you. He is like Liam Neeson. He's a man with a particular set of skills, and he will find you. So, don't disappoint John. Don't make him hunt you down. Just plan on being here. Put it on your calendar. Let me give you your homework, and then we'll close. Talked about all the foxes that are ruining the vine. Let me tell you the biggest one, and I sort of hinted to it. The biggest foxes ruining vines these days are phones. No doubt about it. Okay? And it's not just, I'm speaking to teenagers here, because Teenagers have actually learned to grow up and kind of use the phone somewhat responsibly. It's the rest of us who are addicted to them. The rest of us who can't handle the dopamine hit. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. How many of you could not sit through this 30-minute sermon without looking at your phone? And I'm not talking about looking at a Bible verse. Okay? Now that's affecting us as a society, but it is killing marriages. The little foxes spoil the vineyards. Some people touch their phones more than they touch their spouse. Some of you connect to your device more than you do your spouse. Some of you look at your phone more than you do your spouse. Some of you talk to your phone more than you do your spouse. So the homework this week is this. I want to challenge you to have a phone-free hour. And I'll let you decide when that hour is. It can't be while you're sleeping, okay? That's cheating. I'll challenge you to make it the last hour of your day. If you normally both go to bed at 11, shut them off at 10. Put them on the charger, put it in Do Not Disturb. The world will survive without you and your impact for another 8 hours, okay? But find a time to disconnect. No phones the last hour of the day. What do we do in that last hour of the day? Well, pretend like it's 1995 again, okay? If you can remember that far back. Maybe use it for conversation with your spouse. Maybe use it to read your Bibles together. Maybe use it for a time of intimacy. Use it to pray together, which is the most intimate thing you can do with your spouse. Find a way to connect. You can, on the iPhone, I'm not sure with Android, but you can set the alarm to get ready for bed. Just set it for then, and when that goes off, put the phone away. Disconnect from your phone and reconnect with your spouse. Shouldn't be a big deal, whether you've been married a few months or many decades. Let's work on being better at disconnecting from our phones and reconnecting with our first love. This morning we've been talking about a holy covenant of marriage. As we end, I want to invite you to a higher and holier covenant. And it's the covenant with Christ Jesus. And if you're not in relationship with Him, this morning you can do that. We'll have an opportunity here in just a moment. We're going to sing a song. And if you will come forward, if you're ready to put on Christ in baptism, we'd be honored to help you with that. Maybe your marriage is on the rocks. Maybe you could use the prayers of our shepherds. Maybe you could use some resources and some counseling. Head to the back during this last song. Find a shepherd. Pray with them. Ask for some help. They'll point you in the right direction, okay? We are a church that believes in serving marriages and families together as we go to heaven as a family. This now is the time to respond. If you need to respond, won't you come now as together we stand and sing.
Restore my spirit, Lord, I need restored. My heart is weary, please help me, dear Lord. I stand in need of more strength from your word.